Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We will begin with our prayer to be followed by the national anthem. May we request everyone to put yourselves in the presence of our Lord.
God Almighty, thank you for bringing us together to celebrate Cebuano culture and heritage through the sharing of our stories. We need this in this time of uncertainty, O God, to remind us of our identity as a people, unique, blessed, and proud. This reminder must inspire us that whatever challenges we face, whether unseen, alien, and treacherous, can always be overcome when we are united in working for the present and the future and the heritage of our children and community. We pray for our present-day heroes who are fighting against the virus and other threats that besiege us today, our own people struggling to overcome these threats, and those who have died, fallen but never forgotten. Dearest God, heal our land. Amen.
Kayang magiliw para sa silanganan, halag ng puso, salve mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, kuyanda ng matipig, sa manlulupig, ikapasisiin, sa dagat at mundo, sa simoy at sa langit mong mga, magilang ang tula, tawid sa bagay minamahal, ang isang ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningning, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may magigiling. Lupa ng araw na luwal at ipagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga abin, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Maayong hapon mga Cebuanon. Welcome to sa Kabilin 2020 online activities. This is an engaging space to appreciate and experience Cebu's culture and heritage. To formally start our activity this afternoon, we would like to introduce Ms. Marie Sol Gonzalvo, the head of the Social Wellbeing Cluster of Ramon Aboitiz Foundation Incorporated, for her opening remarks.
Maayong hapon, magandang hapon, good afternoon to all of us. Welcome to our 9th and last online event for Gabii sa Kabilin for this year. Before we begin, I start by acknowledging all of you, our partners and storytellers who are tuned in today via Facebook Live. Please do drop a line in the comment section where you are from, your location, and your organization. We'd be happy to recognize you, no? Wherever you are right now, I hope you're safe and indoors, especially as we in Northern Mindanao and the Visayas are experiencing Typhoon Vicky. So, of course, safety is our first priority. So go on ahead. Let us know where you are from. I also would like to acknowledge our partners from the past and present, especially those who have been part of the past 9 online events of Gabii sa Kabilin. In the Ramon Aboitiz Foundation, we believe that we all have stories to tell and that we are all part of one grand story. Our heritage, our culture, our people, our traditions, our colorful history, and of course, our shared destiny. And we use our stories to rise above our challenges and to learn from our past so that we may build a better and brighter future. As we are delighted to partner with the University of San Carlos Museum today and to bring to you the webinar called Lapulapu, the Man, the Myth, Setting the Record Straight. And this is, of course, as we take part in the National Quincentennial Committee celebrations of the 2021 Quincentennial Commemoration. It was no accident that Magellan landed in Cebu 500 years ago and met his fate in the epic Battle of Mactan. Today, we still draw lessons and insights from the historic event. No? And we all do this because I believe all of us have that Lapu-Lapu spirit alive within us. Courage, bravery, boldness, Cebuano pride, all of these, Filipino pride, are wonderful attributes that can definitely carry us through the new normal. So, Let me do my task today, aside from opening this webinar, to introduce our two distinguished speakers for this afternoon. Let me go on ahead with our first speaker. He is the head curator of the University of San Carlos Museum and associate professor as well of the university. He graduated with a degree of anthropology at USC. He pursued his master's in Philippine studies at UP Diliman and earned his doctorate in anthropology also in USC in 2014. And with this, he's also published 4 books. First, in 2013, is Salapi, the Numismatic Heritage of the Philippines. In 2014, he published 2 books, Pagsulay, Churches of Bohol Before and After the 2013 Earthquake, and the other one, Looking for Kapitan Tawi, Memory and Myth Making in Bantayan Island, Cebu. I'm very curious about this book. And of course, in 2015, he wrote the book, co-wrote the book, The War in Cebu. That is our first speaker, Dr. Jose Eleazar Sir Jobers Bersales. Sir Jobers, thank you for joining us today. I go to the second speaker. He specializes in early Spanish colonial history of the Philippines, and he spent many years of graduate and postgraduate research in various archives in the Philippines and in Europe, particularly in Spain, Portugal, and Italy, where he also delivered lectures in prestigious gatherings of scholars, such as in one of Spain's oldest universities, the Universidad de Sevilla, and in the Sociedade de Geografia de Lisboa in Portugal, among others. I hope I said that right. And as a prolific scholar, he published more than 30 books and over hundreds of monographs on various topics in local and national histories. The most important of these is Ferdinand Magellan Armada de Maluco and the European discovery of the Philippines. This is the first comprehensive and fully documented book on the subject written by a Filipino historian, earning for him the recognition as one of the leading scholars on Magellan history. He is also the only Asian member of the multinational Comité Internacional of Sevilla from 2019 to 2022 in Spain, spearheading the celebration of the 500 years of the circumnavigation of the world. He's appointed as one of the 5 members of the panel of experts by the National Quincentennial Commission and is currently the director of the Partido Study Center and the newly created Magellan-Elcano Study Center at the Partido State University in Camsur. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor also to have Dr. Danilo Gerona. Doc Danny, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Doc Jobers and Doc Danny, how are you today? I hope the weather is cooperating from your side of the world.
We're both in Cebu, so the weather is fine.
Yes. And I hope our internet will cooperate for this morning.
Yes, thank you for the invitation.
Yes, it is an honor. And I think Doc Danny is also here trying to connect. Doc Danny.
Hi, Sol. Yeah, it's raining here in Bicol.
In Bicol, it's raining. Oh,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that the typhoon is lower, no? Much lower. I think
Yeah.
northern Mindanao and Visayas. So I think it's good. They have better weather than us. So I
Yeah.
won't delay anymore. Thank you very much, Sir Danny and Sir Jobers. And I turn you over to the first segment speaker, Dr. Jobers Bersales. Go ahead, Sir Jobers.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to once again to Rafi and the Casa Gorordo Ramon Aboitiz Foundation Inc. and Casa Gorordo Museum under the Gabii sa Kabilin program. This is the last of the series, I think, for this year. And so I'd like to thank everyone also for attending this webinar. My task will be to discuss to you some of the myths that have been perpetrated, especially on the internet, about Lapulapu, Magellan, and the world they live in. Okay. So the error of your ways, debunking myths about Lapulapu, Humabon, and so one of the myths I'll talk about 8 myths here. The first myth I will talk about is that Humabon and Lapulapu were Muslims. I remember about 10 or less than 10 years ago, one mayor in Cebu City was made a sultan by a group of Muslims. That was well-meaning. The intention was good, but Cebu was never Islamized. Cebu was never part of the Islamic world, no matter how much people would probably think. It is clear from Pigafetta's book, the Chronicle of the Magellan Expedition. He describes Cebuano, the shoreline, as full of altars, makeshift altars, mga gagmay na altars, with idols, no? Mga concave ang idols, hollow at the back, grotesque or very ugly looking. That's not allowed in Islam. The Muslim faith does not allow any image of Allah or of God in the practice of the faith. They have words. When you go into a masjid, a mosque, there are quotations, there is a name, but you don't have any faces or idols, unlike in Christianity where there are many saints. No? In other words, it was clear that Cebu, or well, at least this part of the Visayas, and Mactan by extension, were not Muslim. In fact, it is clear from Pigafetta's chronicle that Pigafetta identifies a Muslim. He calls him a Mohem. At that period, they called them Mohammedans. A Mohammedan in the court of Humabon. So why would he single out a Muslim in the court of Humabon, who was the interpreter of Humabon? If Humabon was Muslim, he would not say there was a Muslim in the court of another Muslim, of a Muslim chief or something. So it was very clear, it's very clear in the Pigafetta Chronicles that he mentions that there's a Muslim in the court of Humabon, and that Muslim was his interpreter, to Magellan's interpreter, who was Enrique from Malacca, or Enrique of Malacca. That's one myth. And by extension, I do not think Lapulapu was Muslim. There is a claim that he was Kalipulaco and he was from Borneo. I will tackle that later. That myth. The second myth is that this myth, no, that Humabon was there's something wrong with the grammar of this presentation. Let me correct that first. We might be accused also of having our own. So there's this myth. There's this myth that Humabon was related to the Chola dynasty of India. There's a web page that makes this claim, no? That Humabon was a chief of Cebu related to the Chola dynasty of India. And they have all this genealogy of the Chola kings and how eventually Humabon was part of that. That's why Humabon used the title Raja. The use of Raja, of course, doesn't necessarily mean that you run a Raj or you are a kinglet or a quasi-state, as in the Raj of India. It's common in Malaysia until today. In fact, their their sultanates, the rulers are called Radia, but they're Muslim. The hereditary kings of Malaysia, the Datoks, they also call themselves Raj, no? Radias. Doesn't follow. There's a lot of cultural borrowing of titles. We know that there's an influence with India through Sumatra and through Java, Majapahit kingdoms, which were trading with the natives of the Visayas. Doesn't mean we were part of the Majapahit Empire. It doesn't mean we were under the Majapahit. But surely enough, with our many boats, swift moving boats, it's not impossible that there were traders from all the islands of Southeast Asia. We would have been dealing with them. And along the way, you would have cultural borrowing. You would have used titles which were used in Java, other than Datu, Raja. So, but it doesn't mean that you're automatically Indian or that you have Hindu belief just because you use the word Raja, which we tend to mispronounce as Raha, which is the Spanish pronunciation of the letter J. So that's why we say Raha, but it's actually Raja or Radia. And that's borrowing the title. There's no evidence at all of hierarchy the way you see in India, or the practices of Hindus. That's one myth. Now, myth 3, which is related to the previous one, is that Cebu was a Rajanate because Mabon carried the title Raja. This must have been a Rajanate. Well, basic proof there is when Legazpi arrived in 1565, he met Tupas, who was the young prince during the time of Magellan. Tupas was the one who first met Magellan and his retinue when they arrived before Magellan met Humabon. Humabon sent his son-in-law, who happened to be his nephew. Naminyo sa anak ni Humabon nga babae, si Tupas, but Tupas at the same time was anak sa igsuon kuno ni Lapulapu. That's why they say it's, according to Pigapeta, he was a nephew at the same time a prince, meaning he would inherit the Sugbo port. But was Tupas called a Raja? No. Tupas was called Dato. Dato Tupas when Legazpi arrived. So what happened to the Raja name? It disappeared after Magellan left. But there's no proof of a quasi-state collecting taxes, building defenses. That's what the state does. No, an entire Rajanate does. It produces surplus food items to be traded, and it defends itself with a retinue of a body of weaponry and fortifications made of brick. Because in India, you'll find all these structures made of brick, and brick is so easy to make. You just get yuta, fashion it, form it into a rectangle, and then you pile it high to create a building. We don't have. I'm an archaeologist. I've never excavated a structure, a pre-colonial structure in Cebu made of brick. Father Serrano, Father Sedenio, one of the first Jesuits to arrive in the Philippines, had to look for stone quarry in Rizal, I think Rizal of Montalban, which he found using volcanic tuff in order to build churches, the first churches in Manila. If we were Hinduized, why was it that a priest had to look for stone quarries and had to teach Filipinos, Tagalogs, and Cebuanos how to build stone churches? If we were a Rajanate, there would have been stone structures like in Borobudur, in Java, in Borobudur, in Indonesia. No, we would have found so many Hindu images, but we found only these two: a Ganesha from in Mactan and a Siva, which were crudely made. Two evidences lost during World War II. Don't make a whole kingdom. What is this? This is proof that there would have been Indians here who were Hindu, who were trading here, and who had lived somewhere or stayed for long periods of time and had their own altars and were praying to their gods. If this was part of a Hindu kingdom, a Rajanate, he would have had all kinds of temples made of stone. We would not be using caves as churches, ang simbahan when the Spanish arrived and they started converting. They said ang Filipinos used caves as simbahan. The word simba was to go to a cave to venerate or to go to a tree, balete tree, to pray to it. We didn't have structures. So the Indians introduced a Rajanate but never taught us how to build Hindu temples. That's impossible. No? So that's a myth. And no matter what, there was someone who said that no, the Spaniards built Catholic churches on top of Hindu temples. No, I'm sorry. You don't have a stone church will not stand with the foundations made of brick that's about 100, 200 years old. Besides, in the excavations that have been done on churches, no, nothing, no foundations. No. Rather, churches were built on sacred grounds of natives who were animists, who believed that they have power. Until now, our folk Catholic practices are still seen in our folk Catholic practices, that we believe in the power of objects, of idols, of trees, of whatever that comes out from time to time. We're not Hindu. We're not Hindu at all. Okay? The fourth myth is that Lapulapu came from Sumatra or Borneo, and Cebu was part of the Visayas was part of the Srivijaya Empire. Not Srivijaya, Srivijaya. This was started by H. Otlebeyer in 1926 when he wrote an article for a magazine called Asia, I think. No proof whatsoever. This was the discovery at the time in Palembang of a kingdom in Sumatra, Palembang, Sumatra. People always thought before the 1920s that the Srivijaya Empire, which ran from around 600, 700 AD to around 1200, 1300, when the Majapahit of Java destroyed the kingdom, took over the empire. They thought it was just mythical writings on stones or something. Until two stellar, one stone carving with letters with talking about the history of Srivijaya was discovered in the river banks of one of the two rivers of Palembang, now in Palembang, now a city in Sumatra. When that appeared in the 1920s, Bayer also immediately wrote that the Philippines was part of the Srivijaya Empire. And here comes Gregorio Zaide writing 20 years later about the cultural history of the Philippines, and he says we were part of the Srivijaya Empire. That you have Jovito Abellana, a very brilliant man, was not a historian, he was a writer. He made a lot of plays. He came from a family that made dramatic performances on stage, kanang entablado. And he wrote Bisaya Patronymics Srivijaya and made a mythical representation of Cebu as part of Sumatra and things like that. Published in typescript, never published in a book, but typescript, 1961, never presented to historians. He never went to any national conference to present his book of the origins of the Visayas and Cebu. And it stuck. Many people think it's real. Many people today read Bisaya Patronymics Srivijaya and take it as if it's gospel truth. There is no evidence whatsoever that they were part of the Srivijaya. The Srivijaya Empire was marked by, again, brick and stone temples, buildings made of stone, carving on stone, idols that are Buddhist, Hindu-Buddhistic idols. No evidence whatsoever. None. None. Only those two in Mactan. But that is, you find Chinese ceramics in the Philippines all over. Does that make us part of the Chinese empire? Are we now to say that so many Chinese porcelains have been recovered dating to the Ming Dynasty. Therefore, the Philippines was part of the Ming Dynasty. That is what happens when you stretch your imagination. And here, the late Jovito Abellana wrote these things, but never claimed them to be real. He never made any claims that this, what he was writing, was the truth and was real. It's people who read him and rewrote what he wrote, based on the theory of the 10 Bornean datos, that which was proven in the dissertation of William Henry Scott, Scotty, 1967, sa UST. He proved that the 10 Bornean datos was a myth. Started with the idea nila Otley Beyer of the period, the theory of waves of migration, that the first that migrated to the Philippines were the Negritos, and then the Indonesians, and then the Malaysians. And so people started thinking, okay, if everybody came from Indonesia and Malaysia, then maybe Lapulapu must have come from Borneo or Brunei, and or maybe Sumatra, because Sumatra is Indonesia. Those theories have been debunked. But until now, textbooks still talk about them as if they are genuine truth. They are not. There is no evidence. On the contrary, there is a theory of the peopling of the Philippines coming from Taiwan going south, from China going towards island Southeast Asia. Maybe in the end, we might be even ahead of the people of Malaysia and Indonesia today. No? There's a theory that says that the peoples of the Philippines may have come from Northeast Asia, from Fujian, from Taiwan, things like that. So then you write a story about that. You write something like a Bisaya patronymics Ming Dynasty or something, or Qing Dynasty or whatever, or China, whatever. And then you start saying that all our stories come from China. That we were Chinky-eyed and we turned dark. Then everybody will believe. In fairness to Jovito Abellana, he never made any claims that what he was writing were real, that his writings were real. It's people who uncritically read his works and posted them on the internet or wrote about them as if they were gospel truth. There is no evidence, unfortunately. Myth 5. Cebu comes from Cebu. Tambok sa baboy. Spanish for pork lard. Meaning that before the Spaniards came, Cebu was already named after a pork fat in the Spanish language. Come on. Idiotic. Second, that it comes from Cebu. This is also in Patronymics Srivijaya, Isjaya of Jovito Abellana. And strangely, if you go to Wikipedia, on the article for Cebu City, it states here, the name Cebu comes from the old Cebuano Cebu or Cebu, to trade, a shortened form of Sinibuyaang Hingpit. The source is Patronymics Srivijaya, repeated by Celestino Macachor, 2011. It just goes to show that you should never believe everything you read on Wikipedia. I've already corrected this in my column. Cebu was an invented term in patronymics. Are you saying that the whole barter trading only happened in Cebu? That is why Cebu is named after it, because this was the only place in the whole of Southeast Asia where barter trading, the word Cebu for barter trading happened, or no barter trading happened in Dapitan, in Panglao, and all other places. They are also part of pre-colonial history. Early in the time of Magellan, of Legazpi, these places, Baybay, Leyte, Samar, Dapitan, Panglao, Bohol, they're already identified in the time of Legazpi. And then Cebu is the only place that is named Cebu because there was barter trading here. How did those other places survive if they did not trade? So this is a repetition, an uncritical repetition of an article, of a small book written by Mr. Abellana, which should be read critically. It's just an origin myth that should never be taken seriously. That should be taken as a 1 month's imagination of how Cebu began. Myth 6 is the Battle of Mactan in Esperanza. I was able to go to Mactan, one of the first fieldwork of explorations I made with my students. We went there, it was a looted site. The proof there is that, according to people who post this on the internet, so many artifacts were found in Mactan. Yes, that is correct. But so many artifacts were also looted in Mactan Island, even during the Spanish period, to the point that when the scholars, archaeologists wanted to excavate in Mactan, there's nothing to excavate anymore. But we have records at USC Museum of artifacts, of burials recovered in Mactan Island, in Opon, in Lapulapu City. So the evidence of so many artifacts does not make Mactan a battle site. We go back to Pigafetta. And what does Pigafetta say? If you set out from Cebu to go to Mactan, it takes you about 3 hours. And this post says, no, you can do that now in 30 minutes. If you use a motorized bangka. In the time of Magellan, they used a karak, a sailboat, and if there was no winds, they would have rowed out to Mactan, and that would have taken them up to 3 o'clock from midnight. They waited for daytime. If you use the same karak to go to Mactan in Esperanza, you will not reach Mactan at 3 o'clock in the morning by coming out of Cebu, the port of Cebu, to Poro. It will take you maybe 2 days. The Battle of Mactan, or Mactan if it was in Mactan, would have happened a day later or 2 days later. We would be celebrating the Battle of Mactan instead of Mactan on April 30 or maybe April 29, because it would take Magellan a long time to use his boat to reach Mactan, maybe a day after or maybe many hours later, maybe in the afternoon the following day. So the battle would have ensued in the afternoon. It would have been high tide. The the boat used by Magellan would have reached exactly the shoreline instead of what happened in Mactan, where the boat could not reach, the ship could not reach the shoreline. According to Pigafetta, two arquebuses, 2 fires of an arquebus, the guns at the time, ang distance nila, because the shoreline was very, very shallow. Low tide, pagkabuntag. If Magellan arrived in Mactan from Cebu, it would have been high tide, mga alauna sa hapon. High tide sa Mactan. The battle would have been in favor of Magellan. It is clear that this is a myth. Dili tinuod ng Sapulo. Myth. Oh, this is myth 7. Myth 7, not myth 6, forgive me. Myth 7 is that Enrique de Malacca was a Cebuano. Oh, that's incorrect. It's a claim made by Carlos Quirino. No evidence whatsoever. He just said, well, it's clear from Pigafetta that Magellan, that Humabon was talking to Enrique de Malacca and talking to Magellan. He forgot. Carlos Quirino did not critically read Pigafetta. It is clear in Pigafetta that when the negotiations began, the parley began, the discussions began for tribute, Enrique de Malacca was brought in beside Magellan, and on the part of Humabon, there was a Mohammedan or a Muslim who knew how to speak Malaccan because he was trading all over in the same manner of Muslims today all over the place selling your DVDs. Magsige nagbiyahe. So kibaw na mo speak of Maloko, the language of Maloko, the modern day name for Malacca. Yeah. Oh yes, still Malacca today. Ito Maloko. So it's clear that there was an interpreter ni Humabon talking to Enrique, and that they would translate what they were saying to each other. So sayop na siya. Dili Cebuano si Malacca. Di siya taga-Karkar. Pero istorya sa nga after sa gubat diri, ning uli siya sa Karkar. Dili ba sa nakos mga istorya ni tao? Why in all places? Why Karkar? Why not Sibonga or San Fernando, the hometown of my mother? No, maybe the one making that story is from Karkar. Kami kay among kaliwat taga-Parian, ang ingon ni ang Rines side, ningon ni nga taga-Parian to si Enrique. Nga ang Bersales side taga-Bugo na si Enrique. Nga akong mother side ang Rines kami ato San Fernando. Taga-San Fernando si Enrique. You make all kinds of claims that have no basis. In truth, read Pigafetta over and over again. It is clear that Enrique was bought at the age of 14 by Magellan during the siege of Malacca, the Portuguese siege of Malacca, where Magellan was there together with think Juan Serrano was the very person who invited him to come back to Malacca. Moment original intention kay Magellan, ikan sa Spain, mangita og westerly route until eventually mabalik siya sa Malacca. He would have completed the circumnavigation if he arrived in Malacca. Kaya kika na siya Malacca in 1511, tuyok siya balik. No, on a different route. Wala na may tabo. Ipatay siya. So, to conclude, what can we say? Here's a post from Facebook. I've removed the name. Pero my God, there's so many amateur historians who think that just because they know a little of what they've read, they can talk on Facebook or any internet platform about what they know. And this is weird. I mean, this only adds to the confusion. I will read that. The biggest lie that will never die. Lapulapu was an enemy of Cebu. Lapulapu is a pirate. So, na mga grammatical problems. No? Kita palang kadaan. Hindi kibaw in English. Lapulapu was an enemy of Cebu. Lapulapu is a pirate. Kisa maning Lapulapu ko sa past tense man. Kunya karon na present tense man. Lapulapu did not kill the Magellan. So, strong grammar. That alone should tell you, kini, binuang nga pagkasulat. When you read, kita kini ka, binuang. Basta in English, way klaro, di pa gani kapital ang Mactan. No? As we were not in an ambush scene, it was not battle, as Magellan has no intention to fight. Pastilan. Magellan had every intention to destroy Lapu-Lapu and his people. He had every intention to fight. He told Humapon, ayaw away, I will show to you the power of the Spanish weaponry, of the European weaponry. He had every intention to destroy Lapu-Lapu and his realm because they did not. Lapu-Lapu said, I will never pay tribute. I will never surrender to Spanish sovereignty and I will never recognize Humapon. No? Ang kanina ni ba niya? Muriyak ang mga tao, hamo pa, may kakuyaw po na niya. My advice to everyone, read critically. Ayaw mo tuo dayo. Ayaw mo panihaan ng mga namutar ni Trump sa United States. Mga grabing mga konspirasi. Ayaw mo tuwa ng mga istorya bahin sa bakuna karon. Tanawa, read critically what you find on the internet. Kita pala kada na in English di ba? Mga spelling way klaro. Di ginitarong, no? Check the source first and ascertain its validity and reliability. This one does not provide a source. No? Wala. Sus mabuang ka na pa. The artwork is beautiful but it fails short in research. Lapu-Lapu, known as Paduka de Bantag, is from Borneo. He seek asylum, so past tense, present tense, in Cebu and was assigned to farm in Manawili. My God. And it's on Facebook. It's flooding on Facebook. There's so many of these errors on Facebook. So my advice to conclude is, read everything with a grain of salt. Do not believe what you read. Go to the original sources. Go to the historical sources. And Dr. Gerona, who will talk after me, will tell you these original sources on Lapulapu, on this period. Thank you very much, and I hope I was able to enlighten you with a lot of the myths that have been happening all over this because of the coming of the quincentennial.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me here. And of course, thank you very much to Dr. Jobers Bersales, a good friend of mine. He actually has cleared the road already for my presentation on the historical side of the issue on the Lapu-Lapu. Thank you very much to the organizers. And I saw from the messages there, Consul General Cruz of the Philippine Embassy in Madrid is watching right now. So let me now proceed to the discussion. can I have the slide? Well, it gave you an image of who Lapulapu was. This my painting. I did painting on Lapulapu based on the documents I got on the available data I have. This actually was a painting depicting the night when they planned out for the massacre of the Spaniards, of those who survived the Battle of Mactan. So there is Lapulapu, the aging Lapulapu. There was the Tupas, the young guy. And then the painting, there were other Raja or Humabon in some way. So this discussion will revolve around the search, in search of the historical Lapulapu. Can we go to the next slide? So first, let me go to the sources of historical information. As Dr. Jovers has pointed out, and I completely agree with everything he mentioned there, and I'm really very grateful, as I said, because he cleared the road for my discussion on the historical aspect, because there are so many misconceptions on Lapu-Lapu brought about by, as pointed out by Dr. Jovers, by people who immediately jump to conclusions, make remarks without really going through the reliable sources. In fact, some of my book has been misinterpreted by by a number of people without really going into the more incisive reading of the materials. So we have to go to what are our sources? As Jovers has pointed out earlier, there are certain myths and legends. And of course, any great person in history is a potential target to myth making. And Lapu-Lapu was among them. So as far as the local sources are concerned, of course, we can hardly rely on them. They were passed on from one generation to the other by word of mouth, by tradition, and therefore they are very fluid and could be very vulnerable to misinterpretations and, as I said, to myth making. So we have to look at the sources, written documents, so to speak, that would not change through time. And among the documents, of course, we can only have the documents, the written documents from the works of the Spanish and the Portuguese chroniclers. And among them, we rely on the eyewitness accounts. At least two of them would have reference to Lapu-Lapu. There are other writers or eyewitnesses who wrote about their experience and what they have seen in Cebu and Mactan, but only few of them, at least as far as as far as I know, at least Pigapetta and Dimapra were the ones who made mention of Lapu-Lapu and provided very sketchy details on Lapu-Lapu. So the two eyewitness accounts. Pigapetta, although Pigapetta did not actually mention the presence of Lapu-Lapu in the battle, and probably he did not see Lapu-Lapu in person. Pigapetta must have heard from the natives of Cebu who Lapu-Lapu was, certain details about his physical appearance and probably certain background, personal background on Lapu-Lapu. Dimapra, because he had traveled twice, at least, as far as the records are concerned. Dimapra wrote actually an account, but it's not yet very much known to historians, because the first published material was which I saw in the Biblioteca Nacional de España some 5 or 10 years ago, was actually published only in the late 19th century, and it has not been translated so far. So, but then Dimapra wrote very brief details on the troubles of Magellan and their presence in the Visayas, in Cebu and in Mactan. And he again traveled in the Loaiza expedition. So he was very much familiar with geography of the Visayas and of course of the background of Lapu-Lapu. In fact, in his work, he mentioned of his interview with Raja Kulambo and get some details, some certain details which had not been written about by Pigafetta and other chroniclers. The other sources would be, what might among historians would constitute as secondary sources, would be the interviews by Spanish and Portuguese royal chroniclers and historians. But then I put some credence on their work because they are the ones who are privy to informations of the king and of the Casa de Contratación and the Consejo de las Indias, who were responsible for the activities of these expeditions, and a number of them must have gotten information from certain documents which are no longer available to us from the court of the Spanish king and the Portuguese king. Although, of course, Magellan did not work, and it was not actually under the Portuguese at the time that he came to the Philippines. But then they certainly must have access to certain informations which, as I said, were probably no longer available and no longer known to us historians on Magellan expedition, because they must have been lost along the way. And one thing also, aside from the fact that they must have read this Spanish and Portuguese royal chroniclers had access to, would be the people who actually joined the expedition. And some of these chroniclers, in fact, mentioned that they had interviewed some of the survivors. So, for example, Pedro Martir de Anghiera, in fact, mentioned of a certain man, Martin de Judicibus, I think, that whom he interviewed and provided certain details, even as to the reasons why the Spaniards were massacred in May 1st in Cebu. And he says it was something to do with a sort of a jealousy on the part of the men of Cebu regarding the crew of the Magellan, who had certain interests, or probably even did some abuses to the women of Cebu. So these people, those secondary sources, the materials they provided us are secondary sources, strictly speaking, yet they provided more reliable information because they certainly were taken from people who were familiar with events, who had witnessed the events. That's we got it from them. For example, Gaspar Correa provided us the detail on the age of Lapulapu, because although Gaspar Correa was actually Portuguese, you have to remember that the crew of the Trinidad were arrested in the Portuguese territory in the Moluccas, and therefore he must have gotten information on the documents carried by them and their experiences. The other one would be the Spanish missionary, in particular Fray Aganduro Murit. Of course, the Augustinian missionaries came in 1565, and Aganduro Murit came, I think, 50 years after the Magellan expedition, more than around the early 1600s, so more than 50 years after the Magellan expedition. But then, what is interesting about Aganduro Murit is he was so fascinated with the Magellan account that he interviewed the old people of Cebu, and some of them would say that they still know the people who were present during the time of the Magellan arrival, and he provided a certain information about the background, for example, of Tupas, about what happened in the massacre. In fact, he was the one who was among those who mentioned as to the death, that one of the causes of the death of Magellan was because of Cristobal Rebelo, whom he said was actually the bastard son of Magellan. So can go to the next one. What about Lapu-Lapu? How much historical materials do we have about, or historical data do we have, other than the myths and the legends and speculations that we have? Well, one thing is sure is he was the aging chief of Upon. Contrary to popular belief that he was the chieftain of Mactan, that's not actually true. Based on the sketchy materials we have, both from primary documents and from secondary sources that we have, there were actually four more other chieftains in the island of Mactan. So Mactan is not actually a single chiefdom. It was actually composed of several villages ruled by certain chieftains, and among them was Lapulapu. There was in fact one chieftain there, Sula, who in my initial reading, Sula was actually allied with Humabon, but there were some other sources which seemed to suggest that actually Sula was also trying to his allegiance, his affiliation to either Humabon or Lapu-Lapu was not actually very clear. So that's one thing. So we know that Lapu-Lapu was not actually the chieftain of the entire island. But he was only the chieftain of an Upon or Opong. But then there were other chieftains aside from Sula, aside from Lapu-Lapu. There were three more chieftain villages that were mentioned, but they were not actually specifically mentioned. But there were references to other villages and other chieftains. In fact, there was another village known as Bulaya or Buaya. So we are now certain that Lapu-Lapu was not the only chieftain of Mactan. He was the chieftain of a village of Mactan. But then, it's very clear also from the available records we have that Lapu-Lapu was considered as the overlord among the chieftains of Mactan. So other chieftains were apparently allied to him, except of course to Absula, who was at one in some documents could be interpreted to be allied with Humabon against Lapu-Lapu, but in another document that I read, I was quite surprised because it appears that he was not very clear in his allegiance, as I said, to Lapu-Lapu or to Humabon in that matter. So was he the native Mactan or Sumatran, as Dr. Bersales has already pointed out? There were certain speculations that he was of course an outsider, but I completely agree with Dr. Jobers that it's not true. Although some of the reasons why there were certain speculations that Lapu-Lapu could have come from other places at that time, because the second half of the 15th century in Southeast Asia, particularly in Malacca and Sumatra area, was actually convulsed with certain political, disturbances, and a number of native chiefs in those areas were moving away from their respective residences to escape retribution from the shifting allegiances that they have because of the political convulsions happening in that particular part of Southeast Asia. And of course, that was true, especially in the first part of the 16th century, when the Portuguese conquered Malacca and started making their forays in the eastern part of the area, reaching as far as Moluccas. So, but then I subscribe wholeheartedly to the belief of Dr. Jobers that he was not actually an outsider. Based on the historical documents I examined, when Lapu-Lapu said that he refused to kiss the hand of Raja Humabon because he says there that I cannot kiss the hand of someone whom I have been ruling for a long time, which shows already that he was very old and he has been there for a long time already in Mactan. So he must have resided there, was born in Mactan, and probably his family had been ruling the village in Upon for a long time. So that, I would say, that discounted the possibility that he was an outsider and he was a Sumatran, or he had been traveling, has come from other places. I suspect he must have been born around 1540 or 1550, So that's that's the reason probably why Gaspar Correa says that he was very old. So because when Magellan came, he must have been either 65 or 70 years old. So that would mean he must have been born around that 15 about 1450 or 1455. So they were there already for a long time. Was he an animist or a Muslim? If you look at my painting, it's great. One of the insignificant aspect of the painting that of the painting was that there was a lechon, the leche in that or a lechon in that particular gathering of Lapulapu and Humabon, indicating already that Lapulapu was not a Muslim. Um, and there were, of course, references to certain villages there. For example, one Spanish chronicler, I think it's a royal chronicler, mentioned that there was a certain that the village of Bulaya or Buaya was supposedly a Muslim village. Is we have no confirmation for that, but this was a claim of a certain chronicler. But it does not necessarily follow that because a certain village there was probably Muslim, that Lapu-Lapu was also Muslim. I have this very strong resistance to this belief that Lapu-Lapu was Muslim. One of the reasons because there was a very widespread or a very overwhelming evidence that and even from the real records of the chroniclers that many, if not most, of the people in the Visayas were wearing tattoos. Um, Based on the tradition in the 16th century, at least, the Muslims were forbidden to make certain kind of engravings or tattoos in their body. So it outright seemed to suggest that he probably would not was not a Muslim. And as even the Loaiza expedition would would mention that, as Jovers has pointed out, there were really actually images that had been recovered in various parts of the Visayas, and probably it's not an exception to Mactan. Was he a pirate? The documents, Spanish chroniclers would generally at least one or two of them, not all, but because they would only mention that Lapula was a very powerful chieftain, and he had a very good warriors and familiar with this sort of technology of war in that particular period of our history. But it does not necessarily mean that he was a pirate the way we understand it in the Western sense. He was engaged in plundering, as all the chieftains in various parts of not only of Visayas and of the Philippines at that time were engaged in. So, and also we have to understand that the act of plundering at the time was not only associated with robbing, with being thieves, but it has also a certain political component. The idea about a mystical power that one who conquered more people or more villages were believed to possess more power. And so to conquer, plunder villages would increase not only the belief of his power, but also the prestige of the person ruling the territory. And Lapu-Lapu was such. Can we proceed to the other? So this is, of course, as I said, the painting that I tried to depict Lapu-Lapu as an old man, and there was a lechon there showing that they were feasting with lechon, and definitely he could not have been a Muslim in that particular, at least in that particular context. Can we go to the next? Lapu-Lapu, Humabon, and Magellan. What was the cause of the conflict between Lapu-Lapu and Humabon? Throughout history, apparently, it has never been mentioned why they were at odds with each other until fairly recent documents I found suggested that one of the possible reasons would have been their family feud. The reason is, I think it was Hines de Mapra, who had traveled twice, joined the Magellan expedition and the Loaiza expedition, who mentioned that, Lapu-Lapu was actually the brother-in-law of Raja Humabon. So we never learned of that throughout history, but I mentioned that for the first time in my book. that they were brothers-in-law, and that was according to the gossipy detail provided by Hines de Mapra, that they were brothers-in-law. And why were they eventually parted ways? My suspicion is this. You have to remember that in the pre-colonial Philippines, concubinage is widespread. Okay, it's a polygamous society. But it appears to me that this now a conjectural feature of my research. It's no longer based on facts, but based on the logic of research, given the little available data we have, that it appears that the Humabon must have dropped the sister of Lapulapu, probably from being a primary wife to being secondary or tertiary, I won't say whatever, but there were certain hierarchies of categories of the wives at the time. And that seems to be evident during the baptism in Cebu. When Humabon was baptized and the wife named Juana was baptized, Pigapetta was very, very graphic in his description of who Juana was. She says she was very, very pretty and she was very, very young. And in my estimate, Humabon was a little bit older, much, much older than Juana. Probably he was in his 50s and or even early 60s. Or late 50s, probably. The description of a young wife would suggest that he probably was not the sister of Lapulapu. So that could be, well, it's a more shaky. I'm inferring on a shaky ground, but that's what we have, the best we can have at the moment. So it's probably this could be the reason why. And you have to understand that when Magellan came to be baptized with your wife already implicates marriage, meaning to say, because you won't be baptized if this particular woman would not be taken as your wife. So apparently, because of the Catholic Church would only allow a single wife, it's probably the Hun must have chosen Juana this time as the legitimate wife within the folds of Catholicism, and probably he dropped the other. Not that he abandoned the other women, but probably relegated to a much lower status in this hierarchy of wives in the colonial Philippines. Okay? So that's one thing. The economic issue, the complaint or the accusation that Lapulapu was a pirate seems to have stemmed from the fact that Lapulapu had been intercepting the vessels entering the port of Cebu. And probably it's a result for what reason, but that seems to have been suggested by a number of documents we have. So it's not simply my inference, but there were certain direct references to this that Humabon had been complaining against Lapulapu's demand for the payment of taxes of the ships going in the port of Cebu. And for that reason, this the ship owners or the crew of the ships would complain already if Humabon demanded for certain taxes, because they said, we have already paid our taxes when we entered that particular port. And apparently it was Lapulapu who was responsible for this. If you go to the Merida dictionary, you will realize that there were a lot of different taxes being paid even before the coming of Spain, sort of port taxes in that particular area, which shows that the people of Cebu were very, very much familiar of such kind of trading activities even before the coming of the Spaniards. So that could be the other reasons why they were at odds with each other. The other thing is there were certain issues of power, of course, supremacy, the desire to control certain territory. We have to understand, in my way of looking at it, Humabon apparently was not the warrior type. From the way physical description provided by Pigapetta, apparently he was a pot-bellied, was short. He was not in a way the warrior kind that we know. And where did the wealth of Cebu come from? My suspicion is it came from the taxes and the trading activities that were happening in Cebu at the time. So it earned its wealth not so much from plundering, but more because Humabon was a manager, a commercial manager, so to speak, in a territory frequented by foreign vessels, and therefore Cebu was enriched because of the taxes paid by these foreign vessels that were docking in Cebu at that time. Proof of that is because he in fact had a certain interpreter, the Muslim interpreter, who, if we look at the Pigapetta accounts, was probably familiar with other places in Southeast Asia and probably had traveled extensively. And Dr. Bersales was right, and that was my position, that Enrique was not actually speaking in Visayan. He was actually speaking in Malay language. In fact, I argued very, very powerfully on this. There were three words that were mentioned by Enrique, which says, yeah, anyway, I just forgot these words, but then it says there that they were actually not found in early Philippine vocabularies, but only found in the Malay vocabulary, which I consulted. So, and it was clear there. Several accounts would say that these interpreters were Enrique was actually speaking in Malay language, and so Humabon, because many chieftains, Colombo and probably the other chiefs, could speak other foreign languages. But I think this Muslim interpreter was not only interpreting, but he was also probably negotiating, a sort of a sabandejas, as they call it in the Malacca. There were certain kind of market supervisor in Malacca at the time. In fact, one of them was actually a Filipino. They call it a Lozois, who was identified in the chronicles of Malaccan chronicles, that they came from Luzon. He was a Lozoes or Luzon. He was a sabandera, a sort of a market supervisor, and probably this Muslim who was associated with Humabon was actually sort of like that. So a sort of a supervisor, so to speak. I mean, it's not very clear to us, but that definitely he must be functioning other than simply an interpreter. So what about Lapulapu? Lapulapu was apparently possessed power because of his, as I said, plundering activity. He has a comparatively more sophisticated technology of war, better trained in a way in terms of, or a better experience in terms of war than the people of Cebu at the time. And that's probably the reason why even the reception of Magellan, compared with Lapulapu and Humabon was apparently more cordial, more in a way receptive to Lapulapu's more peaceful means, despite the fact, of course, that we know that Lapulapu uttered or Magellan uttered certain kind of threats to Humabon. But definitely, what we're saying is in terms of power, there are two poles of power that we have. Lapulapu is power came from his plundering activities, from his being a warrior, whereas Humabon's power came from his being a trader, a manager, and a governor of a certain territory, which controls trade of Cebu, because of the fact that it was Cebu was a port town, a port village, and Humabon controlled the goods, the foreign goods or the prestige goods. Therefore, he controlled the other villages in the hinterland of Cebu, and that's probably the reason why when Pigapetta mentioned of certain chiefs allied to Humabon, these were probably more of a commercial relationship because of the fact that Humabon controlled the insular trade of Cebu. In terms of colonialism, of course, here Humabon was actually looking for a kind of an ally, and he found it in Magellan, of course, to consolidate his control of the Visayas, apparently because he does not possess the, you might say, the war technology or the expertise about war in Lapulapu, and he found Magellan armed with all these sophisticated European weapons as a very, very useful ally to probably control the entire of the Visayas. So, and that's it. But as I said, contrary to popular belief, uh, what about the issue of colonialism in terms of Lapu-Lapu? It's very, very clear from the records that the various chroniclers, if we probably would doubt, because they were Spaniards, that okay, they were probably making up certain issues that Lapu-Lapu was actually receptive of the authority of Magellan and Charles V, who Magellan represents, and therefore he probably was not going to yield to Magellan. But the various records suggest that Lapu-Lapu's initial response to Magellan was to accept Magellan and Charles V, the authority of Charles V. I think as historians, the way the accounts were presented, the details provided, suggest that there were there were sufficient information on the part of the chroniclers what was taking place at that time, and therefore I can probably put some faith in their conclusion that, or in their claim that Lapu-Lapu accepted Magellan in this particular instance. Okay? But then, what Lapu-Lapu seemed to have refused to acknowledge is the fact that Magellan wanted Lapu-Lapu to kiss the hand, besa mano, as he puts it in Spanish. Even Aganduro Morris mentioned that Magellan wanted him to kiss the hand of Humabon, and of course Lapu-Lapu could not accept that. And was he willing to pay tribute? Yes. In fact, even Sula himself mentioned that, okay, I paid tribute, but I only brought here 2 goats and chickens, all these things, because Lapu-Lapu later on would not allow me to give the complete number of goats being demanded by Magellan. But Lapu-Lapu, based on the Spanish sources, was willing to pay these tributes. But he said, I could not pay the complete amount, but I only pay this particular amount of certain goats and all these things. So what about the issue? It appears that Lapu-Lapu, it's not an issue. I think the reason is probably Lapu-Lapu was aware of what was happening in Southeast Asia at that time. Southeast Asia was actually gradually being absorbed under the colonial juggernaut, being trampled upon, of course, by the European intrusion into Southeast Asia. Okay, I would have said more, but I think we have the limited time, so I would just say at least the main point had been mentioned already. So, so can we just show the other slide? Okay. Okay. So, can we have the last one? I just meant, okay, there's a certain island there, Mactan and Cebu. It shows the strategic location of Mactan to intercept the traffic of these foreign vessels coming to Cebu, to the port of Cebu. That could probably, as I said, one of the reasons why there was war between the two. Lastly, just to wrap up this point. So, in the Battle of Mactan, outright, based on the available data that we have, it shows that Magellan attacked Mactan without any sufficient provocations from Lapu-Lapu. Apparently, it's very, very true. The historical record suggests that the Spaniards at that time were already very, very much familiar with the rules of engagement. You have to understand that one of the fathers of human rights was actually Bartolome de las Casas, a Spaniard, and other Dominican friars at that time were among the leading spirits of humanism in Europe at that time. So they were already very much familiar with the principle of requerimiento, the so-called buen guerra, meaning to say that you cannot just engage in war without sufficient provocation. Of course, one of the reasons why the Spanish soldiers were allowed to engage in war is if it has something to do with religion. If you're a Muslim and you want killed to Christianity, then that's a sufficient ground for waging war. What about the technology of war? Well, as I said, the Mactan warriors were in a way far more superior in terms of knowledge of war than probably than the Cebuanos, so to speak. One of the reasons is there was a document that says that Lapulapu was actually sent spies in Cebu to see what was going on before Magellan attacked Mactan. The other reason, Lapulapu asked Magellan not to attack them because they were still preparing and because it's still too early. But actually, it was actually a trap because they said what Lapulapu wanted to do is for Magellan to attack not very very early because it's still dark and they already dug up holes in the shores of Mactan for the Spanish soldiers to fall into the trap and kill them. There were, of course, sufficient armaments at that time. So that's it. Thank you very much for this lecture that we have.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Danilo Gerona, Sir Danny, and can we bring in also Sir Jobers back? We are now in our Q&A. I'd like to thank them again for accepting our invitation because the reason for this topic actually is because we noticed that there were several information about Lapu-Lapu perpetuated that were definitely not true. And no matter how much, like Sir Jobers has been constantly even answering this fake fake facts, walang kamatayang perpetuation din ng mga fake na information about Lapu-Lapu gihapon ang are still showing up even in your feed. So that is why we wanted to settle once and for all these fake information. And so we brought in not one, but two of our leading historians in the country, Dr. Jobers and Dr. Danny. Thank you very much. And so before we even begin with our Q&A, I'd just like to remind everyone who are here in our watching our webinar that you can still send in your questions by chatting or commenting them. And we have a trivia actually prepared. These are questions given by Dr. Jobers and Dr. Danny actually. So those who will be able to answer them correctly and the first one to answer them will get a prize. So anyway, can we have our first question? This comes from Christina Krong Morgia. If Cebu didn't come from the word that meant trade, where did the name come from, or how do you think it came about? Who would like to answer this? Yes, Sir Jobers.
I should answer that because I forgot to answer that in my slide. According to scholars, the word Cebu, the old name of Cebu, not Cebu. Cebu is a Spanish rendition. Danny knows that Cebu or Cebu, as the Spaniards wrote it, they could not pronounce the guttural G. The Spaniards would say Sokbo, Sakbo. It would lock onto their throat, the letter G. So they pronounce it Cebu or Thubu, actually. Thubu at the start, Z or the C, which is pronounced with a TH. It comes from Subbo, which means to wade on shallow water. Because apparently the port of Cebu was quite, it was easy to defend because the enemy could not dock directly on the shore. Anyone who wanted to go to the port of Cebu first had to go out of the ship and wade on shallow water. It's the same situation with Lapu-Lapu's Punta Inganyo. Yeah. He met Magellan not in open, but in Lapu-Lapu, in Punta Inganyo, where the shoreline has a very low, at a very long low tide that's very far No? And that's so it's from Danny. He says that
Yeah, yeah.
the technology of war, the natives knew how to use geography to their advantage. So Sugbo was a port where you could not just dock directly. You had to go first from a distance and walk and wait. And so if you're humabon, you can identify from a kilometer away, is he trading or attacking? That's where the name Sugbo comes from, to wade in shallow water to enter the port.
Yeah.
And so we
hi-
set the yes, sir. Sir
Yeah,
Danny.
I would like to add to what Jobers has said. That's right. Actually, basis for that, and just to add to what Dr. Bersales said, Alonso Mentrida, an Augustinian missionary who wrote a dictionary in the early 60s, mentioned that. In fact, there was a definition on what Dr. Bersales has said. Yeah, that confirms Dr. Bersales'
Thank you.
discussion. Yeah.
All right. So we settled that the name of Cebu does not come from Cebu or does not come from me. It does not mean it. Rather, it does not mean trade, but it means actually to wade in shallow water. Sa Bisaya pa, taas o hunasan ang Cebu, ang Sugbo. Oh. Okay. That's our first question. Let's go to our second one. And then please prepare for our trivia in a little while. Still from the same person. Okay, with the internet so full of these fake stories and information, is there any recommended or reliable online source or organization that we can trust about history, preferably online for Gen Zs like me? I think this webinar can be your source. So you can share actually the link to this webinar, and you can constantly follow also our Gabii sa Kabilin Facebook pages, because we have a lot of things about local history that we really tackle here, not just in webinars but also in talk shows or in videos. And definitely we also invite important and very well-known speakers like Dr. Jobers and Dr. Danny actually. So mga suki ni nato sila in the next year. I know they will still be invited to a lot of our webinars.
Yeah.
Ay, kuniyo ba? Yes, sir.
Can I just, in connection with the question, let me, of course, just to promote what we have. I put up a YouTube channel especially on the Magellan history, just to, yeah, that's the point of Jovers, that we have to correct a lot of the misinformations in the internet. And so we put up a YouTube channel, and you can probably watch them. It comes out every week, and so there are many details about the Magellan expedition, Enrique, the Victoria, and all the various details of the expedition based on documents. So hopefully it clarifies a lot of issues.
Also, your best source is the National Historical Commission of the Philippines.
Correct.
And the National Quincentennial Committee. The NQC website, NQC under NHCP, has uploaded even the original documents that you can download on Magellan. They're in Italian, they're in Spanish, they're also in English. And there are the source documents, and then there are all these webinars, including, I think, this one. It's also accessible.
I was about to say... Yes, sir.
I'm also working with Wikipedia to correct some of the, a bunch of errors, starting with the Rajanate of Sin and all those stories. So we're slowly, because we're very busy, Danny and I, with the Constitution, so we're inching forward it, but that will happen soon.
Yeah, wow. Our two speakers who are very busy still find time to correct information, and we'd like to thank them for that. I was about to say, Sir Jobers, that we are very happy that Gabii sa Kabilin is also a partner now of the NQC, the National Quincentennial Commission, and we'd like to thank Ian of NHCP for actually reaching out to us. So as Sir Jobers mentioned, NHCP and NQC also have a site where you can find the true stories or true information about history. Thank you. Before we go to our third question, can we have our first trivia? Can we flash our first trivia? Fast fingers this time. Okay, here's our first trivia. What is the name of the outmoded and debunked or disproven theory that the Philippines was occupied first by three groups of people? First the Negritos, then the Indonesians, and finally the Malays. So just type in your answers to the comment section of our GSK FB page, and the first one, of course, gets the prize. Thank you. Let's wait for the second trivia later on. Let's have our third question, please. Our third question from Andrew John Rebusias. Despite discoveries, why is it that these beliefs and concepts about Lapu-Lapu still persist in the education, especially in the educational system and in Filipino culture? How important is it to debunk these false beliefs? Kinsay mutubag ani, should we ask?
I blame DepEd for their textbooks that have not been updated. It is time for DepEd to correct. Until now, I think waves the theory of the Philippines people by Negritos, and then by Indonesians, and then by Malays. I think it is still in those textbooks. That has to stop. So the educational system is, in fact, you are correct, Andre. It's the educational system that's causing this to persist at the elementary school level. So everybody grows up with believing that the 10 Bornean datos was real, that the code of Kalantiao, Maragtas. Di ba, Dan? And yes,
Yeah, that's true.
but this is really terrible. Our elementary school textbooks in history.
Yeah. Sir Danny, do you have something to say about this?
Yeah, I think the other, of course, to add to what Jobers said, I think we have another problem today, historians and archaeologists like Jobers, because of the proliferation of this, the accessibility of information from the media with all these YouTubes, with all these internet materials. So it adds to more confusions as to what is correct and what is wrong. So I don't know how we are going to address that. How do we control the proliferation of this false news, fake news, even in historical aspects, because of the democratization, I would say, way of the media that we have right now.
Yeah.
Yes, Sir Danny, you mentioned that you have a YouTube channel. Can we ask for your YouTube channel? What's the name?
I think that, yeah, the YouTube channel is Danilo Gerona. They can just type it and probably it comes out. Yeah. So
Danilo Gerona. That's the name of the YouTube channel of Dr. Danny. All right. Yes, sir. Ang sao naman ni nga di pa man yun ma-update ning atong mga books sa elementary level. I don't know.
The most pervasive is Facebook. So many people who read only a portion of Magellan or of Pigapetta, and then they start writing long stories, their interpretations. Kunya dagan mo to, many people believe, oh, is that so? Then share. So Danny is right. Well, historians are helpless because there are many who pretend that they're historians. That just because they can open a laptop and they can read, then okay. The hell with historical method, the hell with reliability and validity of sources. I don't care. I remember one person, I forgot his name, messaged me and argued with me that it should be in Mactan, blah, blah, blah. I said, the source documents do not mention that. And he says, those source documents are wrong. And I said, okay, if they are wrong, I'll give you a matchstick. Burn the National Archives. If all the records, if you don't trust archival records, let's all burn them. And let's just speculate. Let's just sit down, read, peer, and maybe this is the story. And then share it. And that's what people are doing on Facebook, uncritically sharing useless things. Pait kayo, it's pait for historians. Very few historians, and very few historians also go online. Many historians still do not go on Facebook and respond to all this idiocy. That's also, well, it's a challenge to historians then to get a Facebook account and answer all these things.
But we need
terrible.
But again, sir, we thank you kay Teki kay mo ni Sir Danny, no? Kay manubag mo, maghimo mo YouTube channel, kusog kayo sa Facebook ang inyong mga pag-share sa information at the same time pagtubag or pag-correct sa mga wrong information. I hope Sir Danny can understand my Cebuano.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, but I think we need to also make the call for DepEd to correct already our books, no, that we let our students use, labi na sa history. So it's time kay dugay na jud kaayo pa na update. All right. Thank you. Let's have our next question kay murag daghan-daghaning question and would like to answer as many as we can. Unsa ni siyang ihang ngalan? Sumarang Jaya Prasiwat. Why are Sumatran Bornean migration hypotheses and origin myths widely popular in early reconstructions of pre-Hispanic Philippine history, like the Ten Bornean Datus, Abilianes Aguinid historical fiction?
I think it's because many people think that talking about the Philippines, you have to get cultures from others to show that we were like them. These are people who don't see that Filipino, the indigenous native Cebuanos have their own culture, and they don't need to borrow from Sumatra or from other places. It's a very low sense of self for a person to invent stories like that. I mean, why do we denigrate the Filipino as if he or she was nothing before the Sumatrans and all that came? So this persists because many people think that Sumatra has all these temples or that all that, and we have nothing. Well, we have nothing because we were colonized. We lost a lot of our epics, our original stories, our original writings were all burned. All those idols were burned because we became a colony of Spain. But before that period, we had our own. So look for that. Don't go to Malaysia or Indonesia or Brunei or whatever. People should understand that it's a colonial experience that made us lose so much of our past. But that past can be discovered through archaeology and through the chronicles of early missionaries. So I think that's the reason why people invent all these stories. And also because of as I explained earlier, the wave migration, that first the Negritos, then the Indonesians, then the Malays. So if the Malays came first after the Indonesians, then let's look for somebody in Indonesia coming here. And then let's look for a Malaysian coming here. That's debunked already since the 1950s.
Yeah, Hides, can I add to?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, I think much of this proliferation of such kind of a belief, as you versus pointed out, happened within the last 100 years ago. So in a way, until 1950s, 1970s in some way. I think Jobers knows this very well. There's a certain principle at that time in anthropology, so-called big tradition and small tradition. And much of the people, believe that anything, an inferior culture borrows much of what they had from a more sophisticated culture. And we associate, for example, the Moluccas Islands as more sophisticated than the Filipinos. I think it's a result of a very, very poor theorizing. And hopefully now we have actually corrected that with a better honing of theoretical tools and available data. We have disproven all these erroneous principles that we are in an inferior people, primitive culture, and therefore much of what we have, a more sophisticated culture, emanated from the neighboring insular territories such as in Moluccas and then in Malacca.
Wow. That I was struck by your answer, sir. No. This is actually a reflection of our low sense of self and walang pride, no, for our culture. So I think it's time that we assess ourselves, no, why we keep on spreading these kinds of looking for other sources of our culture when in fact we had our own. Thank you for that question. Let's have one more question, please. John Ro Guarin. Hi, John Ro. Dr. Gerona, you have mentioned that Lapulapu was a good raider. Is this the Mangyao practice?
Mangayaw.
Mangayaw.
Yeah.
Mangayaw practice.
Yeah,
Yeah, so yes.
definitely. Yeah, I think the word mangayaw is actually widespread. I've examined the various early 16th century or 17th century vocabularies from the Ilocos vocabulary, the San Buenaventura dictionary, the Bicol dictionary, and of course Mentrida and Encinas and all these things. Apparently, it's the word widespread. Yeah, was widespread. So it's this raiding practice is not only confined to Mactan, to Cebu, but probably in South in the entire Philippines. Apparently, so that was probably. But then Lapu-Lapu excelled, as most Spanish sources would clearly point it out. Lapu-Lapu excelled in that particular practice. So probably he was a renowned warrior and been engaged in plundering activities in various parts of the Visayas.
And that's why he is known to be a pirate, sir. That's where it came. Ano. Okay, thank you. Let's have another trivia, and then we go to the next questions. Trivia first, please. Second trivia, fast fingers. What are the two erroneous or incorrect words still found in Wikipedia as the sources for the word Cebu? We even tackled this in our Q&A. I hope you were listening. Please type in your answers. Okay, let's go to our next question. I think we have our fifth question. Fifth question, please. From Strider 12. As you have mentioned, Lapu-Lapu is
There's
willing
no
to...
dash in Lapu-Lapu.
Would you...
There's no dash in the word Lapu-Lapu.
Yeah, oh. Correct na kan, Sir Joe Bersaan. Kuhaan ang dash. Take out the hyphen, please, of the name, Lapu-Lapu.
Lapu-Lapu is one word.
One word. Okay. Okay, lapo na siya niya repeat, then it would have been co-answer, no? Kanang dili tinuod. That's how we use here in Cebu. Kanang nay dash. Okay, as you have mentioned, Lapu-Lapu is willing to submit to Spain. Would this revoke his status of being a hero? Despite him defeating the Spaniards, his intent was against fellow Cebuanons.
Jovers, yeah. Well, first we have to understand that the concept of a hero must always be taken into a particular context. There is no such thing as a whole package here that you are a hero in all circumstances. Or should I say that you are a hero because you resisted, or you are a hero because you allow yourself to die for a particular cause. I think it must be understood in a particular context, especially in the context of history. For example, resistance would always be, the easiest way to say, oh, you're a hero because you resisted. But you have to understand also in what particular context. When we speak of a hero, we always associate that with a nation. So would it mean that Lapu-Lapu was defending a nation, was resisting a nation, or mean that Lapu-Lapu was not a hero because there was no nation at that time? I think we have to understand that in certain, as I said, in particular context, if we just say, well, Lapu-Lapu did not submit to, was willing to submit to Spain and therefore does not deserve the title of a hero, we have to look at it in a different sense. Probably the fact that it's a matter of history that Lapu-Lapu fought against Magellan. If we look at heroism as a battle against two nations, in that particular context, Lapu-Lapu deserves the title of a hero. Regardless of, as I said, we try to, I think it's anachronistic to say that, oh, Lapu-Lapu should not be declared a hero because there was no nation that at that time. I think it's also an extreme case of looking at heroism. You are trying to put the cart ahead of the horse. So in that particular context, I would say we have to look at it in that particular context. If we look at heroism as one who fought against a foreign intruder, then Lapu-Lapu, whether he was defending an island or a village or a nation, it doesn't matter in that particular context. Or should we deny, of course, Lapu-Lapu that particular role in history that he fought against a certain territory, which I think symbolically, Mactan symbolizes a certain territory outside that of the Spaniards. So the idea of Mactan, of Lapu-Lapu as fighting, not for a nation, but only for a village, contains certain symbolic implications for us as Filipinos. It's not, of course, historically true. that he was a hero, but it was symbolically true that he was fighting for a particular territory, that he was an Indio opposing a foreigner who definitely, as Jovers has pointed out, was there to colonize, was there to intrude, he was there to control a particular territory. In that particular context, we have to acknowledge the role of Lapulapu in that case.
Sir Jobers, do you want to add?
No, Danny has answered it correctly. Well, my point is that you don't have to say that you have to be a nation first in order to have a national.
That's right.
Germany, the heroes, Germany became Germany in 1870s, but their heroes ran to 1,000 years before Germany was even born. The same with the United Kingdom, also with Japan. Their founding heroine Amaterasu was there even before the whole of the Japan was united into one nation. So it doesn't have to be that you have to be a republic to put heroes or that. Yeah. It's where you find inspiration to build your self-esteem, your integrity, and to move your nation forward. So that's why other republics, they invent their heroes. If they don't have any, they invent their heroes. At least we don't invent. We have one in Lapulapu.
I'm really liking our conversation this afternoon because we're also redefining terms here, or ideas or concepts like the term hero. So I hope you were listening what Dr. Danny and Sir Jobers were saying about what's a hero. Dr. Danny was saying it's if this person protects a territory against invaders, against someone who's trying to invade, then that's a hero. Sir Jobers was also saying that a hero should be someone that we get inspiration from, and we should be happy and proud that we don't invent our heroes because we really have heroes who were alive then. Okay, Sir Jobers, naalay ning pangutan na kay niingon man kaangan Lapulapu does not have a dash, but ang Lapulapu LGU kuno nagamit og dash, nagbutang og dash.
It's a mistake when the law was made, and because it's a product of the Republic Act, they cannot change it. Well, they can amend it. It's clear in Pekapeta, it says si Lapulapu without a dash. In Asian practice, well, at least in Philippines and among the Chinese, if a word is repeated, it's a moniker. It's a term of endearment. You call your dog dok dok ding ding ting ting lang lang whatever with a dash. This one doesn't have a dash. I mean, I'm an editor, so I have to think of these things first. Semantic difference. It doesn't make a difference actually. Yeah. But if I were Chinese and I read Lapulapu, I would say he must have been a very important daughter, a very favorite daughter. Lapulapu, Ling Ling, Ching Ching, something like that.
But okay na to, sir. Balaod siya.
The Americans need a dash when they pronounce repeated words. It's a product of the American colonial system of our English.
Okay.
And Lapulapu Titi can amend.
I-amend the law
and remove the
Yeah, but as we're waiting for that amendment, while we're waiting, we have to also correct kay Editor Biagyud si Sir Jobers, and we really have to put what is right. So walay dash. Let's try to be consistent from here on. Walay dash. Okay, next question, please. BB Monkey asks, some of us wonder why we don't have massive structures like Angkor Wat or Borobudur. One of the possible explanations that we did not have large settlements as big as Srivijaya or Majapahit. So we did not have enough manpower to build such. Barangay is just a small polity. No centralized power like a sultanate to direct such big projects. Question about architecture. There.
This is an archaeological anthropological explanation. It is only when you have centralized authority, collecting taxes, producing surplus, and a large territory that you can control, that you are able to have manpower. That actually the question answers already itself.
Yeah, exactly.
As Annie had said, We were fighting against each other. Mangayaw. We were plundering. There were small alliances, but you don't have like my archaeological training is Maya archaeology in Central America. In Central America, we excavated in Belize. We went to Guatemala. You have slavery in the sense of not paying people to work, but they're captives who really work. Our Alipin system was not like that. You had a loan to pay, so you serve in the farm. Once the service is done, you're free to go. And in Maya, Aztec, Inca, you're captured, you work, you build these temples, and you're barely fed. So you have to have surplus, centralized power, law and order, things like that, almost like a state. And we don't have like that. The problem also is archipelagic. We're archipelagic. And we were not Hinduized. If we were Hinduized, Indianized, then the system of control of the Indians, of the kings, would have been done here. We were also not, we did not copy the Chinese dynasties, which are very brutal. If you study the Chinese empires, they're not heaven, they're not paradise. If you're king, you're relaxed. If you're princess, but if you're way down there, life is difficult for you. So we don't have that. So that's correct. No centralized system, no centralized power, just few alliances. And in history, the alliances were depending on the situation. Even Atimawa can join one Datu now, and the next Pangayaw, the next plunder, he would join another. So
Yeah.
very fluid alliances. Di ba, Dan?
Yeah, tama, George.
O, dati.
So, it's good then nga wala tay centralized power ato sa una, Sir Jobers, kay freer ta, no? I mean, you kalisod ba day aning madakpan tag
That's what
mangayaw
affects
niya.
our development now. That's
Yeah.
the reason why this country is very hard time to develop a single nation and a single state. The concept of nation as one and state as one. Look at us. You go to Tagalog comes to Cebu, we will answer in English. We will not answer in Tagalog. We are still united. 600 years ago as we are now.
Yeah. Anyway, a lot of realizations actually are we're getting this from this conversation lang, ha. Anyway, let's have a next question and then we pause for trivia. I'm sorry, I know we're going to go. We are actually in overtime, but this is our last webinar for the year, so maybe we can make a little bit of consideration, especially because we have also two esteemed speakers with us. Camilo Garay asks this question: what is the reason of a coincidence of a pugapo fish named as Lapulapu? Ano kuno coincidence ba kuno na? Is it demeaning to our national hero? Maybe we can rename the fish for that purpose through legal means. Illegalized ang renaming of the Lapulapu fish. Sir Jobers, how do you figure in this question?
Danny,
Yeah.
Danny should answer.
Sir Danny.
Well, one of the questions that I would ask first is, which comes first? Was the fish first named before Lapulapu, or when Lapulapu was given the name, it could have been adapted from the fish? What I saw when I was doing a research on the patronymics of Lapulapu, I was inquiring at in whatever dictionary we have in Visayas, for example, the Mitrida. I was trying to say that I found out that Lapulapu was associated with more of being very agile. Could it have something to do with the fish, the agility of the fish? Was the fish first name? Yeah, it could have been. I don't know.
Kanindot ingan og Lapulapu, uy,
Yeah,
kay
and
you are agile. Di kadali
I've always
madakpan.
been wondering kung Lapu-Lapu was named after the fish.
Yeah.
Now that the fish came first, and he must have been named Lapu-Lapu because he, as a young boy, he moved around,
That's true.
like a fish. And
Yeah.
but I don't know. I really don't know. Pugapo is the name, and in the 1970s, it appeared again as Lapu-Lapu, the fish. Started in the 70s, I think. The renaming of Pugapo as Lapu-Lapu.
Oh,
In the menus of restaurant to sell the fish. They call it
Basi gatuo sila,
But
sir, when they
intriguingly,
eat.
maybe
Basi,
Lapu-Lapu.
Sir Jobers, basin kay kung kanon nila ang fish, ang lapu-lapu, mahimo sad silang agile or agile like lapu-lapu. It could be that. What remains true though, sir, ingon sila is that lami is kabitsi ang lapu-lapu, whether lapu-lapu angan or di lami na kuno siya is kabitsi.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think yes, sir.
The question was, is it demeaning to the hero if you have a fish named after him? What do you think, Dan? Is it demeaning to have the most expensive fish? I have a friend who went to Hong Kong, ordered Lapu-Lapu, and was shocked at the price of the Lapu-Lapu. She had to fish out a credit card because that's how expensive Lapu-Lapu was in Hong Kong, is in Hong Kong pre-COVID. Now, maybe now in COVID, it's even more expensive. So does it demean the hero because the most expensive, the most delicious fish is named after him? Well, we will let the public judge.
Yes.
Because ako, doesn't matter for me whether it's named for a fish or whatever. I know who Lapu-Lapu is.
Okay. So it does not matter whether the name Lapu-Lapu
So
is for or national hero or fish. All right. Let's have one more trivia.
Pasok pa ang insect if
Okay, Sergio. Okay, kanino tana kung imungan isda na himo ni hatag sa isda pero mahal ka ay yung isda. Okay. Let's have one more trivia and then our last two questions. Our last trivia. By the way, I may say this is the last trivia that we're including in our webinar, but there are still three more. Is it three more or two more trivia questions that we're going to be posting in our JSK or Gabii's Kabilin FB site, and you can still win, no, if you answer it. Two trivia questions left, DI. So our trivia number 3. Fast fingers, name one of two works by Jovito Abellana that are the main sources of the invented or fictional accounts of Cebu's prehistory. Just one of Jovito Abellana's works. Okay? And our last two questions, please. The next question. Please flash. Let's flash our next question. Second to the last. Vincent Musa is asking, if they were burned, why would we believe the chroniclers or colonialists? What was burned?
What were the records?
The records.
The records. No. The chroniclers have not told us any epics. There are no epics of the Visayas. Well, there's Dinilawod of Iloilo. It's handed down patchy, very patchy. But for Cebu, the missionaries never said that we have an epic or that these are stories like that. The main thing we have of Lapu-Lapu is Pigafetta, Gaspar Correa, and the investigations that were done with the survivors. So the chroniclers don't talk about the pre-colonial Cebuano. That is why people speculate. This answer will be in archaeology. There should be more excavations on Cebu to establish settlement patterns, the kinds of burials we have would express diseases on the bone, on the body, the way we decorated ourselves. It would be discovered at least partially through archaeology. But if you say the chronicles burned our records, well, they may have burned them. They didn't write anything about our past. They didn't. I'm sorry, but we don't have Alcina. I don't remember Alcina in Historia de Visayas talking of old legends of Leyte, of Samar, of Cebu. Nothing. He just describes the people he saw, how they dressed as they saw them in the 1600s. But how they looked like 200 years before, we don't have that. Yeah. So we lost everything.
Sir Danny?
Well, yeah, I agree with what Job has already said. I think I did not. Well, there were some instances when the friars burned certain not manuscripts, but of course, actually artifacts because of idols, all this things. Yeah, they burned it. Yeah, but not. I don't think manuscript. We do not have manuscript of the Spaniards, so it's. I don't think you can blame the missionaries for that. What we know is that there were no materials, written materials available, of course, except for the Laguna copper plate inscription. But other than that, we do not know any written materials that could reveal to us the pre-colonial culture before the coming of the Spaniards.
So there were no.
We have only the Laguna copper plate. There's a stone stela somewhere in. Remember that the Montreal stone?
Yeah, Montreal. Basbate.
Dr. Gerona, Dr. Borinaga has translated. So in archaeology, you might discover stones like this where there are writings in the Sanskrit-based language or in this whatever Baybayin, no? But then that would be the proof now. Oh my God! So we were really Indianized. And then you find a temple, then that's the confirmation. But right now, nothing. We may have written on bamboo poles, but they could not survive generations. The elements.
All right. Okay. So we don't believe them because there were nothing. There were no chronicles even. Okay. Next, our last question, please. From Roy Mercado, would you say that the military expertise of the Filipinos or Cebuanos at that time is not only sufficient but superior as it incorporates the youth and utilizes resources that are around? Also, what happened to the infrastructures of the time? We can't seem to have a ton of them left, meaning there's nothing left. Okay. The first question is, did we have superior and sufficient military expertise?
Dan?
Well, I can only speak about the historical sources. If you are going to compare that with the inventory of the weaponry carried by the expedition, because the Magellan expedition has a very, very minutely detailed documentation on the amount of cannons they brought, how many arquebus they carried, how many armors they. It's so very, very well intact. I would say the documents there is astoundingly sufficient to understand what happened to the weaponry, to the armament of the Magellan expedition. But then, in regard to the native society, there were Jovers could speak more authoritatively on this because it's an archaeological issue. But then there were certain documents which said that when Magellan came here, they already noticed there were some cannons being used at that time. It's in some parts of not necessarily in Cebu, but then in other parts, for example, in the Loaiza, they were already mentioning of certain cannons that they saw. And we know from a certain recent work of a certain historian that a number of them had been documented to have come from Southeast Asia, and that definitely there were already materials in the Philippines. But that's the only thing I can say in terms of the war technology of the Filipinos. We have the Mactan warriors apparently had better armaments than the so to speak. And in terms of the strategy, the only glimpse that we have was the mention of Pigapetta, that they were digging up certain kind of canals where there were stakes there, where it's sort of as a trap for the Spanish warriors. That's the only thing. Other than that, we don't know.
Yeah, but there is the superiority of the use of geography is obvious in Southeast Asia, and it's clear not just in the Philippines. In the concept of Ili or Ilihan, Ijang in Batanes, also Ijan among the Malays, also in Indonesia. There these natural structures which are high where you can go up and roll stones on your enemy down. They're called Ilihan or sanctuaries. No, the best example is the Ili of Bolhoon. It's right there up. You go up, you can see Bolhoon down below, but it will take you an hour to climb. If you were going to raid Bolhoon, everyone just climbs up the Ili, and then they just throw stones down or whatever. So we knew how to use geography to our advantage. It's mentioned in Pigapetta that there were 3 flanks that met them. that met the Spaniards. So there was indigenous methods of warfare. And there's an article published about that in Philippine Studies on indigenous warfare, I think, I remember, which is based on the Pigafetta discussion and all other reports on how the natives fought. A plundering society as Southeast Asia, we were plunderers, no? Mangaya, we were attacking villages. It's a sign of a knowledge of warrior of weapons and of how to go to and attack villages. So we did have that. Now, was that superior to the Vietnam, as with Magellan's time, proved that if you are not careful with geography and you came from another place and you're not familiar with geography, you will be mired in that problem. And America lost in Vietnam not because the Vietnamese had more firepower. America was killed by mosquitoes and rain. They could not survive going to battle in Vietnam at night with all the mosquitoes, at daytime with all the bullets and the mud up to your during the monsoon season, filthy ang mga Amerikano. So always when you're a foreigner coming to a country, you will be at a disadvantage. And that's what happened to Magellan. Hubris killed him.
Yeah.
He didn't know the territory and he attacked.
Yeah, viewers, those who are interested to read about the pre-colonial weapons, I think Dr. Noel Rodriguez, former professor at the Ateneo, wrote extensively on this. I think that's the one that you have read in the Philippine Medicine.
Yeah.
Okay. So there you go. We cannot answer whether we had a superior firepower, but we did make use of the geography, and that is why we won the battle against the Spaniards, the nilang Magellan. And so this has been a very interesting, grabe ka interesting mo niingon, lami kayo ang kanang conversation nato this afternoon, but of course everything must come to an end, and it's already 5 o'clock. Grabe na itong overtime, but I would like really again to thank profusely our two speakers who really gave their time and expertise. I know the difficulties there is now to hold a webinar with the weather, the problem with the connection, and with Sir Danny Pagani, the problem of the distance, no? So, but they really are here, and I'm so happy. I'm so honored to have the two of them in one webinar. So we'd like to thank Dr. Jose Eleazar Bersales first, and then, of course, we have a certificate for you, Sir Jobers. A certificate of appreciation is given to you for sharing your expertise as resource speakers of this webinar. And this is part of the Gabii sa Kabilin 2020 online activity for December. This is given on the 18th day of December 2020 at Casa Gordo Museum, signed by Rafi President and CEO Ms. Dominica Bichua. The same certificate also goes to Dr. Danilo Gerona. And for that, again, we'd like to thank you, sir. And the two of you, we hope to see you both in the next year, because next year we still have our Gabii sa Kabilin online activities, a series of webinars. We're not yet done because COVID is still here. The pandemic is still here. But I also want to invite everyone, and Sir Jobers already knows this, that we have something very special arranged for the 2021 arrival. We have something organized for you on April 16. Just watch out for information about that in our site. We're very excited for that one night only Gabii sa Kabilin on April 16, 2021. But as it is, we have our webinars from January to December next year. In fact, this is actually not our last web activity. Sorry. This is not our last activity for JSK this year. We have something, actually, a video this will be hosted by Casa Gordo Museum. They are preparing a video, 49 questions with Magellan and friends. That's on December 29. So that's our last Gabii sa Kabilin online activity. And with that, again, we thank our speakers. Daghan kaayong salamat. We also thank all our GSK partners. Thank you.
Kita long
And
time.
I'd like to special mention ni Masi, Maria Cecilia Cabañas, who's the curator of the Museo Cebu, because iyan yung idea nga maglapu-lapu kuan gyud ta webinar. Thank you kaayo, Mas. And we'd like to thank the GSK Organizing Committee, Joey, Martel, Arlene, Sig, and Mac, and our brand development group. Thank you for ensuring that we have our webinar this afternoon. And like I said, we hope to see you on December 29. Let's watch our last gyud nga offering for GSK Online TV, but we hope to see you next year. Please stay safe, especially for the holidays. And thank you again, everyone. Bye-bye. Maayong hapon kanatong tanan.
Thank you so much for sharing your valuable time and for participating in today's webinar. We hope to see you again next year for more engaging activities to appreciate and experience Cebu's culture and heritage. Only here at Gabii sa Kabilin. Have a good day and happy holidays.